Now, with respect to other drugs, we've already talked about trastuzumab deruxtecan and the significant activity demonstrated in the phase 2 trial and other trials that are ongoing. There are other antibody-drug conjugates in development. They have, different compounds that are linked to the antibody, and the strategy is much the same, and that is to target HER2 tumor cells, and by the mechanism of how ADCs work, to internalize the cytotoxic drug. And there's also some sense that there may be a bystander effect as well. So even tumors that have relatively low expression of HER2 may be affected by the bystander effect of using these drugs. Tucatinib we talked about, which is an oral TKI, and the HER2 CLIMB trial was very impressive. There are other TKIs in development, including pyrotinib, and that was a drug that was talked about in the last year from a trial in Asia. The downside to that drug, it's active. It looks in some ways like lapatinib, like neratinib. It also looks that way with respect to diarrhea. So that's going to be one of the issues with that. And my guess is that drug, certainly in the United States, probably isn't going to go very far. Neratinib is an interesting drug. It was approved somewhat unusually in the adjuvant setting. And typically when we see drug approvals, we start in the metastatic disease setting and work our way back to the advanced disease setting. But this drug has a long history and changed hands a few times before it finally settled where it is right now. And after the adjuvant data was generated, there was an existing metastatic disease trial called the NALA trial, which had been underway. And there are other trials looking in the preoperative setting and smaller phase 2 trials that showed proof of principle that neratinib, which is an oral TKI, was active. It was effective even after prior HER2-directed therapy. In the NALA trial, it was patients who had already been exposed to trastuzumab, pertuzumab, TDM1, and the randomization was between capecitabine lapatinib or capecitabine neratinib. So these were patients who had gotten what we would view as the best anti-HER2 therapy prior to going on this trial. And capecitabine lapatinib might have been viewed when this trial was first designed as the next line of therapy based on data. So the comparison was reasonable. It was a truly all oral options because everybody was getting capecitabine, everybody was getting an oral TKI. And what it demonstrated was that the combination of neratinib capecitabine was modestly but statistically better than capecitabine lapatinib. There was an advantage of a couple of months favoring the combination of neratinib and capecitabine. So that is something that the FDA will be considering as it looks for approval of that drug in the sort of third line setting. The big issue with neratinib that's been known since the drug first came on the scene is that it induces diarrhea in a high fraction of patients. And some of the early trials suggested that the fraction of patients experiencing even grade 3 diarrhea was exceedingly high. So this was, of course, very worrisome. And when you think about the pivotal trial, it was being compared with capecitabine to capecitabine lapatinib, another combination that is not exactly diarrhea-free. So there was a lot of concern about how well this would be adopted, how patient-friendly it would be. They recognize this, and they've actually developed strategies right from the get-go as patients go on to neratinib to start Imodium as well as other potential agents. And in the NALA trial, they were able to demonstrate, one, very few patients, and equal in both arms, only a couple percentage, had to actually discontinue therapy because of diarrhea. And the fraction of patients who were experiencing grade 3 diarrhea had markedly been reduced. And the number of days where patients were experiencing serious diarrhea had been diminished to, on the order of about 7. So I think there is a strategy that has been developed that results in markedly less diarrhea than had been seen early on. Nonetheless, it remains a concern not only among patients but also physicians that you have to be on top of this, because if patients, start to experience significant diarrhea, they're not going to want to stay on the drug. And then there are other strategies where there's less data, bispecific antibodies that are targeting more than one antigen simultaneously. And those compounds are just starting in clinical trials, but it's a unique way of approaching the problem, and I think that we'll see more data from those kind of compounds in the next couple of years.
I'm also interested in seeing more data emerge relating to the use of other targeted therapies, including PI3 kinase inhibitors like alpelisib and CDK4/6 inhibitors. There was a study called Monarcher that was presented at ESMO by Sarah Taleni showing really exciting efficacy in metastatic HER2 positive, hormone receptor positive metastatic breast cancer with abemaciclib, fulvestrant, and trastuzumab that actually beat chemotherapy trastuzumab in terms of objective response rate and PFS. So I think hitting other pathways is going to be an important way for us to go.